Hey there, sleepless rabble. Tonight we're diving into one of the darkest and most twisted true crime stories of the internet age. Don't Fuck with Cats isn't just a catchy title, it's a rule carved in stone. Because here at NatMax, we don't just love cats, we worship them. And that's why this story cuts so deep. You probably know the Netflix documentary, but we're going further. We'll uncover the hidden details, the digital breadcrumbs, the obsession of the online sleuths who became real life heroes. And on top of that, we'll tell you what this dirtbag is up to today. Trust me, you won't believe it. And listen, this channel is still young, still clawing its way into the algorithm. So if you care about stories that matter, if you care about justice for the voiceless, hit that like button. Drop us a comment. What punishment do you think he really deserved? And don't forget to subscribe, because your support keeps us alive, and we need you in this fight. This is NatMax True Crime, and you're listening to the story of the internet's most infamous manhunt. Don't fuck with cats. Let's start where it all began. Scarborough, Ontario. Summer of 1982. A suburb that was half strip malls and half apartment blocks. The kind of place where families scraped by and kids rode their bikes until the streetlights came on. Cats lounged on porches, claimed backyards as kingdoms, and slipped through alleyways like tiny gods in fur coats. Life, for the most part, was ordinary. But not for the newborn who arrived on July 24th. His name was Eric Clinton Kirk Newman. A name that should have stayed invisible. A boy who should have had the chance to grow into something unremarkable. Like the guy who fixes your boiler or shelves tins at the grocery store. Instead, Eric would spend his life trying to force the world to notice him. And when the world refused, he'd twist himself into something darker. His parents were barely more than kids themselves. His father, Donald, lived with schizophrenia, slipping in and out of reality. His mother, Anna, was strict, controlling, religious to the point of fanaticism. Together they made a house that felt less like a home and more like a locked box. Eric wasn't allowed out into the neighborhood. No schoolyard games, no friendships built over scratched knees or shared sweets. Until 6th grade, he was homeschooled, which in practice meant kept indoors, fed rules instead of experiences, and watched with a suffocating intensity. So while other children were outside climbing fences or chasing cats down the street, Eric sat alone. He learned how to live inside his own head. He learned how to craft an inner world where he wasn't powerless, where he could invent and reinvent himself endlessly. Cats, of course, don't need to reinvent themselves. Cats are born perfect. Maybe that's one of the many reasons his kind always resented them. They had everything he wanted: grace, presence, self-possession, without ever trying. When he finally did show up at school, he was pale, awkward, and easy prey. Teachers noticed he kept to himself. Classmates remembered him as the kind of kid you could bully without consequence, because no one would stand up for him. The world stamped outsider across his forehead in permanent ink. And to someone like Eric, who craved approval, the rejection was unbearable. By the mid-90s, after his parents' marriage collapsed, Eric drifted into group homes. Psychiatrists passed him around like a file nobody wanted to hold. Diagnoses stacked up: paranoid schizophrenia, borderline personality disorder, narcissism. Depending on who you asked, he was either mentally ill, manipulative, or both. And maybe he was all of it at once. But let's pause here. Many children grow up in fractured homes. Many endure bullying, isolation, or controlling parents, and they don't become monsters. They don't lash out at the innocent. They don't hurt animals, the most defenseless companions we've got. If you're a cat person, and I am, unapologetically, you already know, what someone does to a cat tells you everything you need to know about their soul. And Eric? His soul was already curdling, because what he learned in those years wasn't resilience or empathy or strength. What he learned was how to disappear, how to lie, how to slip into masks and live behind them. He learned that if he couldn't get the world's admiration honestly, he'd demand it by force. The boy from Scarborough never wanted to be Eric Newman. He wanted to be anyone but Eric. He wanted to be dazzling, untouchable, unforgettable. And when life kept handing him mediocrity, he began plotting a way out. A new name, a new face, a new self. The fantasy was taking shape. And soon, Eric Newman would be dead. In his place, Luka Magnotta, the persona he crafted like a weapon. A mask he thought the world could never look away from. Unfortunately, he was right. Eric Newman was dead. At least that's what he told himself in 2006, when he marched into court and legally buried the name his parents had given him. From that day forward, he would be known as Luca Rocco Magnotta. Sounds flashy, right? Like a second-rate fashion designer or a B-list Bond villain. In reality, it was just Eric, hiding behind a name he stitched together like a knockoff handbag. Rocco came from a porn star, Rocco Siffredi. Magnotta from a wine company in Ontario. Put them together and voila, a brand new persona. He thought it sounded continental, glamorous, dangerous. To anyone else, it was paper-thin cosplay. But to Eric, now Luca, it was the mask he'd wear for the rest of his life. He wasn't content with just a new name. He started reshaping his face too. Botox, nose jobs, jawline tweaks, cosmetic surgery as performance art, except there was no audience. Just him in the mirror, desperately trying to sculpt a star out of clay that was never meant to shine. He was obsessed with becoming somebody. The problem was, he had no talent, no craft, no skill to offer the world. So he fell back on the only thing he could control, how he looked and what lies he told. And oh, the lies. Luca invented stories like other people collect stamps. He told anyone who would listen that he had dated Carla Homolka, the infamous Canadian schoolgirl killer. Total nonsense, of course. But he dropped her name like a sick little PR stunt, hoping her notoriety would rub off on him. He planted fake fan pages about himself. He left comments under different aliases, praising his own beauty, his own allure. Imagine the desperation of spending your nights writing love letters to yourself on the internet, pretending strangers adored you. That was Luca's reality. He tried to wedge his way into show business. There were porn shoots under aliases, awkward modeling gigs, even a humiliating TV spot on Plastic Makes Perfect, where he talked about his surgeries. He was supposed to be tragic and glamorous, a broken doll yearning for perfection. Instead, he came across as what he truly was, a man trying way too hard. But here's the thing about Luka Magnotta. He believed his own lies. He built a fantasy world and lived in it so fully that he thought the rest of us would eventually be forced to play along. He believed that if he just kept reinventing himself, new face, new name, new myth, the universe would hand him the fame he thought he deserved. And yet, nothing happened. No one cared. Casting directors ignored him. Modeling agencies passed him over. The only people paying attention were debt collectors because by 2007, he'd declared bankruptcy with over $17,000 owed. Luca was a nobody in a city full of nobodies. And for someone like him, that was unbearable. Because Luca's dream wasn't to succeed. It wasn't even to be liked. His dream was to be seen, to force the spotlight onto himself, no matter the cost. And when the world didn't give him fame willingly, he decided to drag it kicking and screaming. This was the stage where the fantasy hardened into obsession. Eric Newman was gone. Luka Magnotta was born. But Luca wasn't just another identity. He was a character crafted with one purpose: to make sure the world never looked away again. And if Luca couldn't rise through talent or beauty, he'd rise through something else entirely. Something darker. Something that would stain his name in history. And that's when the cats came in. Luca Rocco Magnotta wanted fame the way a drowning man wants air. He wanted it so badly, he mistook reflection for oxygen, kept inhaling his own image and wondering why he still felt empty. After the name change came the hustle. Escort ads dressed up as glamour, threadbare modeling calls, awkward adult shoots under disposable aliases. It was all surface. Cheap lights, cheaper rooms, the brittle sound of a photographer pretending to be impressed. He posed, he pouted, he practiced seduction like a language he never truly spoke. He auditioned for limelight in any room that would have him. Daytime talk, snippets. A segment on a plastic surgery docu-show where he confessed to nips and tucks as though confession itself might make him interesting. He wanted to be the tragic beauty who suffered for perfection. He landed closer to a man reciting a shopping list of procedures and calling it destiny. Agencies passed. Producers smiled and forgot his name before the lift doors closed. Toronto, then Montreal, new flats, new mirrors, same disappointment. Money, of course, dragged behind him like a wounded leg. There was the earlier fraud conviction. Stupid, small-time greed, masquerading as hustle, and then the inevitable bankruptcy. Debt stacked, promises collapsed. A dramatic declaration of ruin that somehow made him feel a little famous for a day. Insolvency paperwork as self-promotion. Even his disasters were drafted as press releases. Online, he played maestro to an orchestra of ghosts. He built fan pages about himself, then logged in under other names to admire the man he wished existed. He seeded rumors and invented romance with a notorious killer, because if you can't borrow talent, you can at least borrow infamy. He left breadcrumbs across forums and comment threads, performing a one-man standing ovation for an audience that was mostly him. It wasn't confidence. It was starvation with a ring light. He kept altering the exterior, Botox here, a sharper line there, because the world had not yet delivered the role he believed he deserved. It never occurred to him that the missing piece wasn't the jawline. It was the substance. Talent earns attention slowly, predation steals it quickly. He was tired of slow, and cats, our saints in whiskers, carried on being perfect without asking permission. They do not audition. They do not seek applause. They glide into a room and it becomes theirs. Imagine how that looked to a man like him. Effortless presence. Effortless love. Given freely to those who deserve it. Cats have what narcissists can't counterfeit. Poise without performance. I don't know when envy curdled into grievance for him. Only that it did. And that it was fatal. Here's the grim arithmetic of his broken career. The more he was ignored, the more extreme the theatre had to become. Each knockback turned the dial a notch. Each closed door taught him the same poisonous lesson. If you can't earn attention, engineer it. He wanted headlines. He wanted strangers to learn his name without cue cards. Not tomorrow. Now. So the auditions dried up. The debt nipped at his heels. The masks started to feel flimsy even to him. And somewhere between the last failed casting and the next fabricated fan comment, he made a choice that would turn desperation into ritual. He decided that the fastest path to notoriety wasn't talent, nor work, nor time. It was harm. It was spectacle. It was the cold certainty that cruelty spreads quicker than craft. The career, if we can call it that, lay in shards. The mirror, however, was intact, because he never stopped looking into it. And in that reflection, he found the only thing he could still control: what to do next to make us watch. What came next would not be a performance. It would be the opposite of art. It would be the part where our beloveds, our soft, purring anchors, walk into his frame, and everything gets colder. The first time he uploaded one of those videos, the internet didn't quite know what it was looking at. A grainy clip, a pale young man, a bedspread, and two kittens so small their paws barely gripped the fabric. And then, plastic. A vacuum-sealed nightmare. The kittens squirming inside a bag, the air vanishing, the camera rolling. He filmed it. He staged it. He smiled. This was 2010, the Wild West of online sleuthing. Viral content still meant shaky camera phones and bad lighting. But cruelty? That traveled fast. People stumbled across the clip and recoiled. The way you would if you saw someone kick a baby in the street. You don't forget it. You can't unsee it. And within days, forums lit up like signal flares. Who the hell is this man? Find him. Stop him. And that's the point, isn't it? Luca wanted to be found. He wanted the outrage. He wanted the disgust. He had staged the scene with props, a specific vacuum, a poster in the background, even the music he chose. Breadcrumbs, left like gifts to a future audience. Because for him, fame didn't matter if no one was chasing him. Attention meant nothing unless it was dragged from people kicking and screaming. The internet responded in kind. A Facebook group appeared. Find the Kitten Vacuumer. It swelled with members. Strangers who'd never met became detectives overnight, trading screenshots, enhancing shadows, identifying cigarette brands. One woman, Deanna Thompson from Las Vegas, noticed details most people would miss. A plug socket, the type of bedspread, the light in the room. Another man, John Green in Los Angeles, cross-referenced objects like a crime scene analyst with Wi-Fi. And what did law enforcement do? Almost nothing. Animal welfare groups were swamped with complaints, but they treated it like internet noise. The police had bigger problems, or so they said. But the online sleuths? They weren't letting it go. Because anyone who hurts kittens, the most defenseless, trusting creatures alive, doesn't stop there. We knew it. Cat lovers everywhere knew it. The pattern is ancient. Cruelty starts small, then escalates. Luca escalated quickly. More clips appeared. Another kitten drowned in a bathtub. One fed to a python. A vacuum cleaner hose aimed at something alive. The production values grew. The sadism sharpened. And each time, he dangled new clues in front of the internet. Like he wanted to play hide and seek with the whole world. Imagine the arrogance. Imagine knowing people are hunting you because you suffocated a kitten. And deciding to upload more. That's not ignorance. That's provocation. It's spitting in the face of anyone who still believes decency exists online. And the community hunting him? They became obsessed. Screenshots of Luca's hands were compared to model photos. His reflection in a TV screen was enhanced, cropped, debated. Groups argued, split, reformed. Some misidentified suspects. Innocent men harassed because of a passing resemblance. It wasn't perfect. It was messy, human, desperate, but it was relentless. Because while Luca thought he was controlling the game, he underestimated one thing. Cat people do not forgive. You can scam fans, you can fake careers, you can vanish into a new name, but you lay one hand on a kitten, and the internet becomes an army. And still, Luca smirked behind his camera. He thought he was untouchable. He thought his cruelty made him a star. But all it really did was sharpen the claws of the people who were closing in. The hunt was alive now, furious and determined. And every new video he dropped was another breadcrumb leading straight back to him. And when the breadcrumbs ran out, Luka Magnotta crossed the line no one wanted him to cross. From cats to humans, from cruelty to murder, and suddenly, the whole world was watching. And yet, while the world scrolled past and the authorities shrugged, there was one corner of the internet that refused to look away. You'd think law enforcement would have stormed in after the first video. 2 kittens suffocated in plastic, a faceless man behind the camera. It should have been enough to rattle cages at every police precinct. But no, the response was a collective shrug. It's the internet, they said, hard to trace. Bureaucracy yawned. So who picked up the slack? Ordinary people, strangers behind keyboards, cat lovers who refused to scroll past cruelty. And let me say this clearly, these people are the reason Luka Magnotta didn't get away with everything. They weren't paid, they weren't trained, they weren't sworn officers, they were just people who looked at those kittens, felt the horror in their stomachs, and said, no, not on our watch. There was Deanna Thompson in Las Vegas, headphones on, eyes locked on every pixel of those disgusting clips. Not a detective by trade, but a data analyst with a hawk's attention and a heart that would not let the cruelty slide. And there was John Green in Los Angeles, tech-savvy, patient, analytical. Together they built a digital manhunt, a Facebook group, screenshot repositories, long threads where people argued over cigarette brands and wallpaper patterns and the exact model of a vacuum cleaner. It sounds absurd, until you realize this was all they had. He had made it a game, leaving breadcrumbs in plain sight, smirking behind his mask. These strangers took the bait. Not because they wanted to play, but because they wanted to end the game before he escalated. First, the vacuum. In one clip, the camera drifted just far enough to catch it in the corner. Most viewers would have ignored it. The sleuths froze the frame, zoomed, compared shapes and logos until they landed on a Royal Sovereign model sold primarily in Canada. One unloved appliance, and the world map got smaller. Second, the wolf blanket. A cheap, tacky comforter draped on the bed. It reappeared in later videos like a watermark, a clumsy calling card. Every time those wolves stared back at the lens, the group knew they were looking at the same space, the same man, the same pattern of harm dressed up as theatre. Third, the cigarettes. Boxes scattered on the floor, not glamorous imports, not obscure brands, ordinary Canadian packs. To most people they were trash. To the group, they were a compass, pointing firmly to North America whenever his sock puppet accounts bragged that he was overseas. Fourth, the outlets. A wall socket is nothing until you care enough to look. The sleuths looked North American style, not European. Slight differences in shape and spacing, the kind of detail you would never notice unless you were desperate to stop someone. With every small confirmation, the fog thinned. Fifth, reflections. Mirrors and dark screens gave him away. A warped outline of a dresser in the glass. The angle of a window in a TV reflection. These glimpses let the group sketch the room he thought he had hidden. They built a mental floor plan from light and shadow, like burglars casing a house they never entered. 6th, geolocation outdoors. He filmed a short piece outside, cars passing, a balcony edge, a particular street lamp, and the way the road markings curved away. People cross-checked Google Street View, block by block, until a grid of balconies and lampposts matched. Montreal. And not just Montreal. A neighborhood. A set of possibilities that narrowed with every screenshot. 7th, the aliases. He loved the chase so much he walked into the hunting party. Dozens of fake accounts slipped into the group, taunting, deflecting, sometimes praising him as if he were a legend already. He recycled favorite film quotes, used the same turns of phrase, even repeated the same typos. His ego was a fingerprint. The group learned it by heart. 8th, the soundtracks. Background music buried under the hiss of bad audio. The sleuths pulled out short phrases and loops, traced them to cheap pop tracks he leaned on, and tied them back to other posts carrying the same musical DNA. It was another thread, small but strong, binding his online personas to his staged cruelty. They also chased packaging, the plastic vacuum bags, the kind of retailer that stocked them. They compared the exact shade of yellow on a vacuum in a selfie to the yellow in the video, a dull little color match that kept pointing back to the same man. They checked light through curtains and guess time of day, then compared that guess to upload times. They obsessed over the tiniest edges of information, because every edge mattered. Were they perfect? Number leads went astray. An innocent man was misidentified and harassed before the group corrected course. That is the danger of crowds without a badge. But the intent, the relentless drive to protect the voiceless, was pure. They weren't just solving a crime. They were fighting for the dignity of every creature too small to defend itself. And while all this was happening, he pushed back. He mocked them, teased them, fed them lies. He wanted to be untouchable. He dangled clues like toys. He underestimated the one law you never break. Do not mess with cat people. If you harm cats, the internet becomes a vigilante army with endless time, caffeine, and fury. We hail them. The real heroes of this story. Not the police who sat on reports. Not the bureaucrats who shrugged. The keyboard warriors. The sleepless analysts. The obsessed few who poured hours into cross-checking shadows and soundtracks. They turned their rage into evidence. They mapped his world from a handful of pixels. They documented what authorities would later use. Their case file rivaled the official one in depth and speed. They paid a price for it. You cannot stare into deliberate cruelty and walk away untouched. They carried the images so the rest of us didn't have to. They kept watch, like a vigil in the dark, because someone had to, and because nobody with power moved until a human body forced them to. Without them, he might have kept torturing in the shadows. Without them, he might never have been unmasked before the worst of it. These were the digital bloodhounds that picked up the trail when institutions failed. So yes, we hail them. We raise a glass, we light a candle, we crown them with every medal their governments never gave them. In a world where cruelty went viral, these people chose to resist. They were right to resist, because as they warned, he was escalating. He wanted a bigger audience, a bigger stage, a bigger crime. The internet was closing in. He felt it and he leaned into the only script he knew. Shock them again. Force them to watch. Make yourself unforgettable. And this time, the victim wouldn't be a cat. It was only a matter of time. Everyone who watched those kitten videos knew it. Every psychologist who's ever studied cruelty knew it. Every cat lover in that Facebook group felt it in their gut. If he can do this to them, he'll do it to us. And in May 2012, Luka Magnotta finally crossed the line. The victim was Jun Lin, a 33-year-old international student from Wuhan, China. He was studying computer science at Concordia University in Montreal, quietly building a life for himself. He was described by friends as kind, funny, gentle, the kind of person you'd want in your corner. He had just ended a relationship and was living alone, dating casually, meeting new people. On May 24th, he met Luca. What happened next was filmed. Because of course Luca filmed it. He always needed an audience. He uploaded a video with the charming title, One Lunatic One Ice Pick. A grotesque sequel to his kitten clips, but this time the stakes were no longer practice. This was murder. The footage, which thankfully most of the world has never seen, is infamous in the darkest corners of the internet. It shows Junlin drugged, restrained. Luca appears on screen with an ice pick. Straight out of Basic Instinct, because even in murder he was plagiarizing. He stabs Junlin repeatedly. He dismembers him. He plays with the body like it's a prop. There are moments too horrific to describe in detail, but know this. It was staged to shock, to force headlines, to make Luca the monster star he always wanted to be. And he didn't stop there. He mailed body parts across Canada like grotesque fan mail, a foot to the Conservative Party headquarters, a hand to the Liberal Party, more packages intercepted en route to schools, each parcel wrapped like a publicity stunt. Because for Luca, that's exactly what they were. He wasn't hiding his crime, he was advertising it. Meanwhile, Junlin's torso was found stuffed in a suitcase left in a Montreal alley. Neighbors noticed the smell, reporters swarmed the scene, and within hours, his name, Luka Magnotta, was blasted across the world. He'd achieved the fame he craved, but at the cost of an innocent man's life. Here's the part that chills me. He planned this. The video wasn't some spontaneous act. He had teased it online, hinted at escalation, even posted under fake accounts predicting the next big thing in shock videos. He wanted people to anticipate it, to dread it. He wanted to be the boogeyman who stepped out of the screen and into the news. And yet, for all his theatrics, Luca was still just a man with a knife, a camera, and a festering ego. He thought he was writing his legend. What he really did was turn the entire world against him. Junlin deserved none of this. He wasn't a symbol. He wasn't part of Luca's twisted narrative. He was a human being, loved by family, mourned by friends, and Luca reduced him to a prop in his performance. For that alone, he deserves every ounce of hate we can summon. The sleuths who had been tracking Luca for years now screamed into the void. We told you. We told you this would happen. And suddenly, authorities who had ignored the kitten videos snapped awake. It was too late for Junlin, but the chase for Luca had begun in earnest. The Canadian press called him the Canadian Psycho. Interpol issued a red notice, and Luca, delighted, terrified, craving and dreading the spotlight, packed his bags and fled the country. The monster was loose, and the whole world was finally looking. But Luca had one fatal weakness, his obsession with himself, and that was exactly what would bring him down. The murder of Junlin didn't stay a local story for long. You can't mail body parts to political headquarters and expect it to go unnoticed. Within hours of the torso being found in that Montreal alley, Luka Magnotta was no longer just an online rumor or a subject of internet sleuth threads. He was international news. Interpol issued a red notice, the digital equivalent of slapping wanted posters across the globe. The Canadian media dubbed him the Canadian Psycho, Because of course they did. He wanted a nickname, a mythology, and now he had one. Headlines screamed his name, his photos, his poses, his fake glamour shots, all the masks he'd created were suddenly plastered across every screen. And Luca? He ran. First stop, Paris. He slipped out of Montreal on a flight, leaving behind his blood-soaked apartment, leaving behind Junlin's family to grapple with the horror. In Paris, he drifted between cheap hotels, sometimes with strangers he'd picked up, sometimes alone. Witnesses later remembered him looking jittery, out of place. He was desperate enough to hide among petty criminals, and, allegedly, even neo-Nazi groups offering him temporary shelter. For someone who wanted to be adored, he was now clinging to the shadows with people who couldn't care less about him. But here's the twisted irony. While he was hiding, he was also watching. Every news broadcast, every headline, every online post, he consumed it all. Luca was obsessed with his own myth. He fled because he didn't want to be caught, but he couldn't resist basking in the attention his crime had generated. He was like a moth trying to hide from the flame while circling it anyway. From Paris, he moved on to Berlin. June 2012, Neukölln district. Gritty, busy, full of cheap apartments and internet cafes. The perfect place to vanish, if you know how to disappear. But Luca didn't, because disappearing meant giving up the one thing he craved. Recognition. Interpol, Canadian authorities, French and German police, everyone was looking for him. Tips flooded in. The internet sleuths who had chased him for years now had the entire world echoing their warnings. He's dangerous. He's escalating. He won't stop. And yet, Luca believed he could still play both roles, the phantom and the star. He shaved his head, changed outfits, drifted from hostel to hostel. But he never abandoned the one habit that doomed him. Searching for himself online. Think about that. He's one of the most wanted men on the planet. His victim's family is grieving. Police forces on multiple continents are working overtime. And Luca? Luca is ducking into internet cafes to type his own name into Google, refreshing news pages about himself like a man checking his horoscope. The manhunt was a global thriller now. Interpol alerts, border checks, frantic headlines. But the truth is, Luca wasn't caught by elite tactical units or high-tech spy gear. He was caught because his ego was too heavy to carry quietly. And in Berlin, in one of those internet cafes, the walls of his fantasy world finally collapsed. Berlin, June 4th, 2012. The city was buzzing the way Berlin always does. Cafes spilling onto sidewalks, students rushing with backpacks, the smell of doner kebabs drifting through Neukölln's busy streets. It's a place where you can vanish easily. Too many faces, too much noise. The perfect city for a fugitive who doesn't want to be found. But Luka Magnotta didn't really want to vanish. He wanted to be chased. He wanted to be seen. And that, in the end, was his undoing. For days, he'd been moving like a shadow through Berlin. Cheap hostels, grimy rooms, fleeting connections. Witnesses later recalled a strange, pale man keeping to himself, chain-smoking, jittery. He wasn't blending in as much as fading, a ghost with a suitcase, living off paranoia and adrenaline. But paranoia doesn't erase ego. And Luca's ego was starving. That's why he ended up in that internet cafe on Karl Marx Strasse. Think about it. Here's a man hunted by Interpol, splashed across global headlines, accused of one of the most grotesque murders in recent memory. He could have used that cafe for anything, sending emails under fake names, planning his next move, reaching out for help. Instead, Luca typed his own name into Google. over and over. That's the thing about narcissists. They can't resist the mirror. No matter how dangerous it is, they'll stare at their reflection until it consumes them. The cafe clerk noticed him. A man named Kadir and Laisli. To him, Luca didn't look like just another scruffy traveller. He looked off, gaunt, twitchy, and, most tellingly, exactly like the face plastered on the wanted notices. Because those posters weren't just in Canada anymore. Interpol had made sure Luca's cheekbones were recognizable from Toronto to Tokyo, and Kadir had seen them. Imagine the tension in that moment. Kadir looks up from his counter, glances at Luca, glances at the screen, sees Luka Magnotta, literally Googling Luka Magnotta. The arrogance, the stupidity, the surreal comedy of it all. A killer, captured not by some high-tech sting operation, but by his own compulsive need to read about himself. Kadir didn't hesitate. He picked up the phone and called the police, and this time, unlike with the kitten videos, the authorities moved fast. German officers stormed the cafe, weapons drawn, patrons scrambling. Luca barely reacted. No grand chase, no cinematic standoff. Just a pale, thin man dragged from his swivel chair, finally stripped of the one thing he clung to: control. When the officers cuffed him, he reportedly asked for something ridiculous: political asylum, as if murdering and dismembering an innocent man was some kind of revolutionary act, as if Germany would shield him from the consequences of his own staged horror show. Delusion stacked upon delusion. And so it ended not with a bang, not with some glamorous villain exit, but with a pathetic little scene in a Berlin internet cafe. Or Luka Magnotta, the man who styled himself like a movie star, brought down by the glow of a computer screen and the sharp eye of a cafe worker who refused to ignore his gut. News spread instantly. Canada exhaled. The online sleuths who had hunted him for years shouted into their keyboards. Finally. They had been right all along. He was dangerous. He was escalating. And without their relentless obsession, he might never have been caught before killing again. Berlin police paraded him in front of cameras, Interpol confirmed the arrest, and Luca's smirk. Because, yes, he still managed one, flashed across the world. He thought he was still in control, that this was just another scene in his movie. But no amount of smirking could disguise the truth. The star of his own nightmare had finally lost the script. And next came the extradition. The trial. The slow dismantling of the myth Luka Magnotta had spent years building. After his capture in Berlin, Luka Magnotta's story shifted from gruesome spectacle to courtroom drama. No more shadows, no more masks, no more online personas. Just a man in cuffs, shackled by the weight of his crimes, dragged back to the very city where he thought he had staged his perfect performance. The extradition was almost cinematic in itself. On June 18th, 2012, German authorities handed him over to a Canadian convoy. They didn't take chances. This wasn't a simple flight back home. It was a high-security operation, complete with a Royal Canadian Air Force jet. That's right. Luca got the kind of escort usually reserved for terrorists or high-level political criminals. The Canadian government wanted to make absolutely sure this man never slipped through their fingers again. When the plane touched down in Montreal, the crowd was waiting. Reporters swarmed, cameras clicked, and Luca, ever the narcissist, smirked behind his cuffs, still clinging to the fantasy that he was a misunderstood star. The reality, he was just another defendant about to face the full machinery of justice. The trial itself didn't begin until late 2014. 2 years of psychiatric evaluations, hearings, and endless speculation about Luca's state of mind. Because that was his defense, not criminally responsible due to mental illness. His lawyers painted him as a man trapped in psychosis, detached from reality, incapable of understanding right from wrong. They leaned on a diagnosis of schizophrenia, a convenient explanation for his descent into violence. But the prosecution had a different story, one of planning, calculation, and manipulation. They laid out the timeline, showing how Luca had teased his crimes online, choreographed his videos, even rehearsed his moves in earlier acts of cruelty. This wasn't the chaos of a psychotic break. It was the premeditated theatre of a man addicted to attention. The evidence was damning. The one lunatic, one ice pick video. The mailed body parts. The blood-soaked apartment. Digital footprints tying him to online accounts where he had practically announced what was coming. Witness testimony tracing his movements from Montreal to Paris to Berlin. Piece by piece, the illusion of insanity crumbled, revealing cold design underneath. The trial lasted 12 weeks. Jurors listened to psychiatrists argue, to friends and family testify, to evidence that turned stomachs. They were asked to balance sympathy for mental illness against the horror of deliberate cruelty. And in December 2014, the verdict came: guilty on all counts. First-degree murder of Junlin, committing indignities to a body, publishing obscene material, mailing obscene and indecent matter, criminal harassment of Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and others. It was a laundry list of charges that read like a grotesque resume. The sentence: life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. Luca sat in court, pale as ever, eyes darting, expression unreadable. The performance was over. There would be no sequel. No glamorous interviews, no red carpet, just a concrete cell and the echoes of his crimes. And yet, even in defeat, Luca couldn't let go of the myth. After his conviction, he gave interviews from prison, wrote blog posts, even attempted to craft a new identity behind bars. He claimed he was being mistreated, that he was misunderstood, that he was still, somehow, the victim. It was the same tired script, played on repeat for an audience that had long since stopped applauding. But for once, Luka Magnotta wasn't in control of the narrative. The sleuths who had hunted him, the journalists who had exposed him, the court that had condemned him, they were the storytellers now, and his story was no longer one of mystery or glamour. It was one of cruelty, capture, and consequences. Junlin's family, dignified in their grief, thanked the jury. They had lost a son, a brother, a friend. No verdict could bring him back, but at least justice had been named. Luka Magnotta would spend the prime of his life behind bars, locked away from the world he once tried to shock into remembering him. And so the stage lights dimmed. The self-proclaimed star faded into the background of prison life. But prison, as it turns out, didn't stop Luca from trying to reinvent himself again. You'd think the story ends here. Luka Magnotta, sentenced to life in prison, locked away where he can't hurt anyone else, curtain down, monster caged. But of course, Luca being Luca couldn't just vanish quietly into the concrete walls of a penitentiary. Even in prison, he found ways to make headlines. Pathetic, absurd, and bizarre headlines, but headlines nonetheless. After his conviction in 2014, he was sent to Port Cartier Institution, a maximum security prison in Quebec. Cold, isolated, unforgiving. Exactly the kind of place designed to bury dangerous men in anonymity. But Luca, he immediately began doing what he always did, crafting a new persona. First came the interviews. From behind bars, he complained about conditions, about being bullied, about not getting enough attention. He even wrote letters to journalists, still trying to control the narrative, still trying to keep his name alive in the public consciousness. Then came the dating profile. Yes, you heard that right. Luka Magnotta, convicted murderer and self-styled narcissist, actually posted on a Canadian prison pen pal site. His ad read like something out of a bad romance novel. Single white male, 33, seeks single white male, 28 to 38, for a long-term committed relationship. If you think you could be my Prince Charming, send me a letter. He wanted someone loyal, preferably educated, with whom he could build a life. As if prison walls were just an inconvenient backdrop for his fairy tale. And unbelievably, someone answered. In 2015, Luca married another inmate, Anthony Jolin, in a small prison ceremony. Jolin himself wasn't exactly a saint. He was serving time for armed robbery and murder. A real love story, forged in the bleakest of settings. Luca called it his happily ever after. The Canadian press called it surreal. For cat lovers and anyone who knew Junlin's name, it was a grotesque insult. He also managed to start selling paintings from prison, trying to recast himself as an artist. Buyers, whether out of morbid curiosity or genuine perversity, paid thousands for his so-called work. Once again, Luca had found a way to exploit attention, even in captivity. And then there were the complaints. Luca wrote long, self-pitying letters about his suffering behind bars. He claimed he was being treated unfairly, denied basic comforts, tormented by guards and inmates alike. He painted himself as a victim of the system, conveniently forgetting that the only reason he was there was because he butchered a young man on camera. Still, for all his whining, he did manage to secure a transfer. In 2022, reports confirmed that Luca had been moved from maximum security to a medium security prison, where conditions are softer. Less steel, more privileges, more chances to write, to socialize, to keep feeding that endless hunger for recognition. And yes, there are still whispers of women writing him love letters, of admirers treating him like some dark celebrity. The same old serial killer groupie phenomenon. Luca's myth still hooks the weak and the lonely, even though the world has long since moved on. But make no mistake, prison isn't a catwalk. Luca's power is gone. His spotlight is gone. He's no longer the star of his own horror show. He's just another inmate in beige prison scrubs, rotting in a cell while Junlin's family lives with the hole he left behind. It's almost poetic, in a twisted way. Luka Magnotta, who craved fame so desperately that he killed to get it, now exists in a place where time erases names, where your crimes don't make you special, where the audience stops watching. He's a ghost in his own story, pacing in a cage, hoping someone out there still cares enough to type his name. And maybe that's the cruelest justice of all. A man who lived for attention, condemned to be forgotten. But before we leave him behind, we have to go back. Back to the true heroes of this case. Not Luca, not the headlines, but the people who saw those first kitten videos and refused to let them slide. Let's get one thing absolutely straight before we move on. If it weren't for a ragtag group of people on the internet who couldn't sleep after watching a kitten get stuffed into a vacuum bag, Luka Magnotta might have kept killing for years. Police, too slow. Authorities, dismissive. But ordinary people, keyboard warriors, animal lovers, people who believed no cruelty was too small to matter, they were the first line of defense. And they nailed it. It started with a Facebook group. A place where strangers, bound by fury and compassion, traded screenshots, dissected Luca's videos frame by frame, and refused to look away. They weren't trained detectives. They were office workers, tech nerds, students, people with day jobs, bills, and cats of their own purring next to them while they stared into the abyss of Luca's cruelty. At the heart of it all were two names now etched into true crime history: Deanna Thompson and John Green. Deanna, better known online as Bowdy Movin', was the sharp-eyed casino data analyst from Las Vegas. She wasn't a cop, but she had a skill set built for digital trails. She noticed the tiniest details in Luca's videos. A vacuum brand, a poster on the wall, the shadows of light seeping through curtains. The kind of micro clues most of us wouldn't register. To her, they were breadcrumbs. And then there was John Green, a lawyer from Los Angeles with a steel trap of a mind and the patience of a saint. He traced Luca's movements across forums, flagged his sock puppet accounts, followed the endless trail of narcissistic breadcrumbs Luca left online. Together, they became an unlikely duo, an investigative dream team powered not by badges, but by sheer will. Let's not sugarcoat it. They paid a price. The endless hours combing through those videos left scars. This wasn't binge-watching Netflix. This was staring into the eyes of a man who got off on killing. They carried that trauma so we didn't have to. They stared into the abyss, and the abyss stared back. But they didn't blink. And Luca? Oh, he knew they were there. He taunted them, toyed with them, dropped clues just to prove he was smarter, better, untouchable. He wanted them to chase him. But he underestimated one crucial thing. People who truly deeply love animals are relentless. They will burn down their free time, their sleep, their sanity to stop a monster. And these people, Deanna, John, the whole online community, didn't just chase. They cornered him. They built dossiers more thorough than the cops. They tracked his movements across continents. They screamed loud enough for the world to finally listen. So yes, let's hand out medals here. Not to the detectives who swooped in once Luca had escalated beyond cats. Not to the politicians who shrugged when body parts landed in the mail. But to the nameless many who sat at their laptops and refused to let a monster walk free. They are the unsung heroes of the story. The kind who prove that compassion and persistence are stronger than cruelty and ego. They turned outrage into action. And in doing so, they saved lives. When history remembers Luka Magnotta, it will remember a pathetic narcissist who killed to be noticed. But when we tell this story, we remember the others. The real heroes. The people who said, "Don't fuck with cats." And from there, we step into the final chapters. What this case revealed about the internet, about how digital sleuthing can outpace law enforcement, and about how one community's obsession changed the way we view online justice forever. This is where the story gets uncomfortable. Because as much as we all want to believe in police dramas, where detectives crack cases with grit and brilliance, the reality of Luka Magnotta's manhunt exposed something else entirely. Ordinary citizens, glued to laptops and chat threads, were light years ahead of the actual authorities. From the very first kitten video, the sleuths were screaming, "This man is escalating. If you don't stop him now, he will kill a human." They weren't guessing. They weren't being dramatic. They saw it in his methods, his need to taunt, the way he staged cruelty like performance art. And they were right. The police, though? Not so fast. When the Facebook group tried reporting Luca's early crimes, they hit a wall of bureaucracy. Jurisdiction issues, lack of evidence. The fact that Luca's cruelty was just against animals, something law enforcement far too often sidelines. Local police would say it was another department's problem. Animal welfare groups didn't have the tools or manpower to chase a ghost across borders. Even when some of Luca's fake profiles and posts were flagged, authorities didn't connect the dots. Meanwhile, Deanna, John, and the rest of the online detectives were doing full-scale forensic work. They weren't just watching the videos. They were pulling metadata, analyzing still frames, zooming into blurry images of vacuum cleaners and power outlets, checking time zones by the shadows in a goddamn curtain. That's CSI-level detail work, except without the paycheck or the badge. And here's the kicker. When Luca finally did escalate, when Junlin was murdered, when body parts showed up in the post, the internet sleuths already had a profile on him. They had threads mapping his aliases, timelines of his moves, even theories about his obsession with movies like Basic Instinct and Catch Me If You Can. They knew his narcissism wasn't random. It was a script he was desperate to follow. But by then, it was too late. Junlin was dead. The system had waited for a body before they acted. It's not that law enforcement didn't care. Once the murder happened, the machine roared to life. Interpol notices, media pressure, resources pouring in. But what this case proved, loudly and brutally, is that the internet, for all its chaos, is sometimes faster at identifying danger than official channels. Crowdsourced justice saw Luca clearly years before the system did. That's the double-edged sword, though, isn't it? Online sleuthing can solve cases. It can outpace police, but it can also spiral into obsession, paranoia, and witch hunts. In Luca's case, the sleuths were right. In other cases, innocent people have been falsely accused, their lives wrecked by Reddit mobs convinced they've cracked the code. The internet is powerful, but it's messy. Still, let's give credit where it's due. Without the Facebook group, without Deanna and John, Luca might have slipped further into the shadows, maybe escalated into multiple murders before anyone caught him. They were mocked at first, dismissed as cranks with too much time on their hands, but in the end, they were the ones screaming the truth into the void, and the void finally answered. Tragically, too late for Junlin. Which brings us to the final question this story forces us to ask. What did Luka Magnotta really want? And what does it say about us that, in some twisted way, he got it? Here's the sick punchline. Luka Magnotta got exactly what he wanted. He wanted attention. He wanted to be remembered. He wanted his name burned into the internet forever. And he got it. But not the way he dreamed. He imagined himself as a glamorous anti-hero. The kind of criminal whose crimes are whispered about like legends. He wanted the same aura as the villains in his favourite movies. Hannibal Lecter, Patrick Bateman, Sharon Stone's Catherine Tremell in Basic Instinct. He wanted to be cool, ironic, iconic. Instead, he became infamous, a meme of evil, a case study in narcissism. His name is permanently glued to phrases like cat killer and Canadian psycho. When people remember him, it's not with fascination, it's with disgust. He's not Hannibal Lecter. He's not a dark genius. He's the lonely, pathetic creep who thought killing kittens on camera would make him famous, and then escalated into real murder when that wasn't enough. But infamy works in strange ways on the internet. Luca's story is now permanently etched into digital culture, not because of who he was, but because of what his case revealed. Netflix made him the subject of a globally streamed documentary. His name trends every time people discuss the ethics of true crime. Even TikTok has spawned micro-communities dissecting his videos and trial footage, kids born years after the crime still horrified by his audacity. And then there's the darker side, the groupies. Yes, he has them. Every notorious criminal does. Somewhere in some corner of the web, lonely women and morbid obsessives write him letters, defend him, fetishize him. Luca thrives on that trickle of attention like a plant starved of sunlight. Even in prison, he's still chasing clicks. But what makes his legacy really disturbing is this. Luka Magnotta wasn't unique. He wasn't even smart. He was a blueprint for something we're seeing more of. People willing to cross moral lines for internet fame. Today, it's TikTok stunts, YouTubers staging crimes, influencers faking their deaths. Luca was just an early extreme version of that same hunger. A warning of what happens when attention becomes more important than humanity. And yet, here's where we flip the script. Luca may have wanted to be remembered, but what actually endures are the people who stopped him. Deanna, John, the Facebook group, the activists who made sure the phrase "don't fuck with cats" became a rallying cry, a line in the sand. His legacy is their victory. His story doesn't belong to him. It belongs to the ones who refuse to let cruelty slide. That's the paradox Luca can't escape. Yes, his name lives on, but it lives on as a cautionary tale, as a punchline, as the eternal reminder that the internet doesn't forgive cruelty to the innocent. And most importantly, Jun Lin's name lives too. In vigils, in memorials, in the memories of his friends and family. Jun Lin was a real person with a real life, dreams and laughter that were stolen. He deserved better, and remembering him, not the man who killed him, is the only way to close this story with dignity. Because at the end of the day, Luka Magnotta didn't get what he wanted. He got what he deserved. A lifetime in a cell, remembered not as a dark celebrity, but as a coward who picked on the most vulnerable beings and called it greatness. And we remember the cats. We remember Jun Lin. We remember the heroes. And we repeat the one line that echoes louder than Luca's ego ever could. Don't fuck with cats. And that's it. Sleepless rabble. The twisted rise and fall of Luka Magnotta. From kittens to murder to the biggest internet manhunt the world has ever seen. It's a story that proves one thing. You never, ever mess with people who worship cats. The Netflix documentary gave us the framework, but you've now heard the details they left out. The obsessive clue hunting, the sleepless heroes, the warnings ignored. And of course, the part nobody tells you, what this monster is doing today. Locked away in a Canadian prison, still trying to pull strings, still writing letters, still craving the spotlight. He wanted fame, and he got it, but not the kind he dreamed of. So now it's your turn. Smash that like button if you stand with the cat army. Drop a comment and tell us, what punishment do you think he really deserved? And hit subscribe, because this channel is young, hungry, and we need you if we're going to keep unmasking the monsters. This is NatMax True Crime. Thanks for staying with us through the darkness. Sleep tight, and remember, don't fuck with cats.